Hello everyone. Now let us continue with the topic that we had been doing in the previous classes as well. The topic was matter in our surroundings. Now in that topic we had seen that how the different states of matter can be changed from one state to another by changing the temperature as well as pressure. So what did you learn? Please let's recollect what we had learned already, that you can change a solid into a liquid or a liquid into a gaseous state by changing both the temperature and the pressure. That means if you increase the temperature, then you can convert a solid into a liquid state and a liquid into a gaseous state. And the vice versa is also possible, that is a gas can be converted into a liquid state by reducing the temperature, as well as on further reducing the temperature you can convert a liquid into the solid state. Now that was all with the change of temperature. Now let us carry forward this understanding in evaporation and boiling. Now these are two very basic and important concepts, evaporation and boiling. Now before we understand what is evaporation and boiling, let us understand that what is boiling. Boiling always happens at a boiling point. Okay, that means we have a term which is known as a boiling point. Now what is boiling point? It is the temperature at which a liquid starts converting into its vapor state. So how would you term it? That boiling point is the temperature at which a liquid changes into the gaseous form. Okay, and every substance has got a specific boiling point. For example, in case of water, the boiling point is 100 degrees Celsius. So it is at 100 degrees Celsius you would see that water would start converting into its vapor state, into the gaseous state, that we term it as water vapor. Similarly, for alcohol it is 70 degrees Celsius, and at 70 degrees Celsius alcohol starts converting into the gaseous state. So likewise we have many such liquids which boils at different temperatures and get converted from the liquid state to the vapor state or the gaseous state. Now the question is that is boiling and evaporation same, or they are two different concepts? Because in case of evaporation we see that there happens to be the change of state from the liquid to the gaseous state, whereas in case of boiling the same thing happens, there is a change of the liquid state into the gaseous state. If both has the same concept of changes from liquid to the gaseous state, then how are they different? Now for that let us try to understand, and for that let me elaborate it more. In case of boiling, what happens that you always supply energy. Supply of heat energy is done. By giving heat energy, what are you doing? You are inducing energy to the system. For instance, if you have a beaker where you have water and then you start heating it. On doing so, what are you doing? You are inducing energy to the system such that the particles which are there, they can start getting energy, they take up the energy and then they start getting converted from the liquid state into the gaseous state. So here you make a deliberate attempt to give energy to the system, which does not happen in case of evaporation. In case of evaporation, what happens that it takes place at any temperature. So if we basically make a difference between evaporation and boiling, then we can do it in this manner. In evaporation, is a surface phenomena. Okay, evaporation is a surface phenomena. Surface phenomena means that it happens only on the topmost layer of the particles. For instance, if we have a beaker and we have water, half beaker is filled with water, then it is only the surface particles which are subjected to the change of state of matter. Whereas in case of boiling, it is a bulk phenomena. Okay, it is a bulk phenomena. Bulk phenomena means you are providing energy to the entire system of the liquid. You are equally giving energy to all the particles of the system at the same time, so that they can get converted from the liquid state to the gaseous state. So that's why, because it happens throughout the system, throughout all the particles, that's why we term it as bulk phenomena. But in case of evaporation, it just happens with the topmost layer. It is only the topmost layer particles that absorbs the energy from the surrounding and converts themselves from the liquid state to the vapor state. Next, in evaporation can happen at any temperature. Okay, evaporation can take place at any temperature, even at low temperature, even at higher temperature. The only difference is, at a lower temperature, the rate of evaporation or the extent to which a liquid is converting into the gaseous state may be less, whereas if you raise the temperature, the level of or the extent of evaporation may increase. Whereas in case of boiling, it happens only at specific temperature or fixed temperature. Okay. So, evaporation happens at any temperature, whereas boiling happens at fixed temperature. As I already quoted to you, that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, alcohol at 70 degrees Celsius. So, there is a fixed and specific temperature at which the boiling would start. In case of evaporation, there is no requirement of external induction of any energy. No external induction of energy. Alright. Whereas in case of boiling, there has to be source of heat energy. Alright. So here, in case of evaporation, happens at normal temperature. It can happen at any temperature. So you do not need to make any deliberate attempt to induce some heat energy to the system. But in case of boiling, you have to subject the system, the liquid, to a specific temperature so that the boiling can start. So I suppose this is understood by you, that in case of evaporation, it is a surface phenomena. It is only the topmost layer particles that will change from the liquid state to the gaseous state. Why? Because they absorb the energy from the surrounding, due to which their intermolecular spaces increases, they free themselves from the attractive forces, and thus they move away from the liquid and thus get converted into the gaseous state. But in case of boiling, you are providing energy to the system so that every particle can gain that energy and get converted into the gaseous state at a faster rate. Second point is that it happens at any temperature, at a lower temperature, even at higher temperature. Only difference is the rate of evaporation would depend on the temperature. Whereas in case of boiling, it happens only at a specific temperature, which we term it as boiling point. It happens only at boiling point, but for evaporation, there is no fixed temperature. For the next point for evaporation is that there is no requirement of external energy induction. Whereas in case of boiling, there has to be a source of heat energy. Alright. So I suppose you understand the difference between evaporation and boiling. Now, as we were discussing about the evaporation, there are many other factors on which the rate of evaporation depends.
Okay, so what are the factors that is responsible for evaporation? So the factors responsible for evaporation are, the number 1 is the temperature. It's temperature. Fine. Number 2 is humidity. Next, number 3 is the wind speed. And the fourth one is the surface area. So these are 4 important factors which are responsible for evaporation. Now let me explain one by one. Now what is temperature? How does temperature influence the rate of evaporation? Now when we take temperature, we find that higher the temperature, more would be the evaporation. Now why is it? What is the reason? How is temperature related to the rate of evaporation? Because when the temperature increases, the molecules of the substance, that is water, gets enough kinetic energy, and due to attaining of kinetic energy, what happens? It leaves the liquid phase and gets transformed into the vapor state. So more the temperature, more would be the energy intake, and it will have more kinetic energy to free itself from the bond that exists between the liquid particles, and that get converted into the vapor state. So that's we see that the evaporation rate increases when we increase the temperature. Similarly, if you decrease the temperature, the rate of evaporation would also decrease because the energy input is less. Fine. The next one is humidity. Now what is humidity? Humidity basically means the level of water vapor in the atmosphere. How much water vapor is present in and around a place is called as humidity. So how does humidity influence? More humidity, less would be the rate of evaporation. Now how is it? Because what is evaporation? Basically the transformation of water from the liquid state to the vapor state. That is, the liquid water gets converted into the water vapor. Now humidity means the level of water vapor in the atmosphere is quite high. So more humidity means more amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. So what would happen? The evaporation rate will decrease because there will be no availability, or there will be less availability of space in the atmosphere for the water vapor to go and add to the atmosphere, and thus the rate of evaporation decreases. But if the humidity level is low, for instance when it is peak summers or during the winters, when you would see that when the humidity level is low, that is the amount of water vapor present in the atmosphere is low, then there is more availability of water, there is more availability of space in the atmosphere, and thus what would happen? The water molecules would readily get converted into the vapor phase, and thus the rate of evaporation would also increase. So you need to understand that high level of humidity would reduce the rate of evaporation, whereas less humidity will increase the rate of evaporation. Next, what is the third factor? Wind speed. Now how does wind speed influence? More wind speed, higher the evaporation rate. Now why is it more the wind speed? Why is the rate of evaporation increases? The reason is wind speed means that the particles of the water the water molecules which are present on the surface of any place. When the wind is blowing at a very faster rate, then what does it do? It induces some energy into the water particles and thereby helps it to get converted from the liquid state into the vapor state. So higher the wind speed, it is going to give more energy. It will enforce the water molecules to get converted from the liquid state into the vapor state, and thus we see that the rate of evaporation increases. Whereas the last one is the surface area. Surface area, or rather I can say more the surface area, more is the evaporation rate. Why is it? Because when the surface area increases, then we find the number of water molecules which are exposed to the atmosphere is more, and thus the energy intake, more number of water molecules would be just exposed to get energy, to absorb energy, and thus get converted from the liquid phase into the vapor state. So you would see that if you after you had washed the clothes, what do? We spread it. The reason why we spread it is that we are trying to expose the water molecules to the maximum surface area. So more the surface area, more number of water molecules will be exposed to the atmosphere. It is going to gain more energy and thus get converted into the vapor state faster. So more the surface area, more would be the rate of evaporation. So to sum up, the different factors responsible for evaporation are temperature, humidity, wind speed, and surface area. How does temperature influence? Higher the temperature, more would be the rate of evaporation. Similarly, lower the temperature, less would be the rate of evaporation. Next, humidity. Higher the level of humidity, less would be the rate of evaporation. Whereas, less the humidity, more would be the rate of evaporation. Third, wind speed. Higher the wind speed, more would be the rate of evaporation. Lower the wind speed, less would be the rate of evaporation. And the last, surface area. More the surface area, the rate of evaporation would also increase. But if the surface area is less or it is reduced, then the rate of evaporation will also be very slow or will also reduce. So I hope this different factors responsible for evaporation is clear. And it is very, it becomes more clear to you when you try to recollect some of the examples, some of the phenomena that you see in and around us. For example, if you are washing your clothes, after you had washed the clothes, if you spread it properly, then you would see that the level of drying up is faster. The rate of drying of that cloth is faster. In summers, we find that the cloth dries faster because the temperature is high. Whereas during rainy seasons, you find the clothes takes a lot of time in order to dry. Why? Because the humidity level in and around is high. So it takes more time for the water molecules to get converted from the liquid state to the vapor state. Similarly, when it is quite windy, if you spread the cloth, you will find that the cloth dries faster. Why? Because the wind is inducing energy into the water molecules which are present, and thus it helps it to get converted into the vapor state. And as I had already explained you how surface area influences and why do we spread out the cloth to the maximum, so that maximum amount of water molecules can get exposed to the atmosphere and get converted into the vapor state. So these small examples that we see in and around us helps us to identify the factors that are responsible for evaporation. You can also take the example of, suppose your mother had mopped the floor. During the winters, what would she do to facilitate faster drying? She would switch on the fan. So what is she trying to do? She is trying to take the help of wind speed. More the wind speed, more would be the rate of evaporation. Clear? So these are some examples that you can identify from in and around you and can actually see that how the different factors of evaporation influences the rate of evaporation.
Now let us carry forward all of these into the understanding and applying them for solving certain questions. For example, we have the first question, why does a desert cooler cool better on a hot dry day? Now you need to understand that there are two things in this matter. One is, it is hot dry day. That means the level of humidity is very less, because it is also an important factor in deciding the rate of evaporation. So we can also say that the fourth concept is that it depends on the humidity level. So questions like that can get solved by applying this concept. Now what is humidity? It is the amount of water vapor that is present in the air. More the level of humidity, more the water vapor, less would be the rate of evaporation. Less the water vapor in the air, that is, if the humidity is less, then more would be the rate of evaporation. Why? Because the water molecules will get enough space in the air to get converted from the liquid state to the gaseous state. But if the water molecules are already there in plenty in the air, then the water molecules will move at a very slower rate from the liquid state into the gaseous state. So the same thing can be applied in case of solving this problem. Here, because it is a hot dry day, that means there is less humidity. And what is desert cooler? That means supply of water. So definitely there happens to be a very good linkage that on a hot dry day, the desert cooler is effective in cooling because the level of humidity is very less. So as the level of humidity is less, the rate of evaporation is going to increase, and thus we know that evaporation also results in cooling effect. Why does it result in cooling effect? Because it absorbs the energy from the surface and gets so that it can convert itself from the liquid state into the gaseous state. So as the level of humidity is very less, the rate of evaporation will increase and it will result in better effective cooling. Okay, next let's go to the next question. How does the water kept in an earthen pot become cool during summer? Now what happens when you take an earthen pot? For instance, if I draw an earthen pot, we know that it is made up of mud, it is baked mud. So there would be very tiny air particles with tiny holes in it. So the water which is present inside the pot comes to the surface and starts evaporating. So you would find that the water particles comes to the surface and starts evaporating. And we know that evaporation leads to cooling effect. That's why the water which is kept in an earthen pot becomes cool during the summer. Alright, okay. Now let's do the next question. How are we able to sip hot tea or milk faster from a saucer rather than a cup? Now for solving this problem, you need to identify what would be the factor that I need to apply in order to see that the rate of evaporation is faster. Here you can see that we have saucer. Now what is a saucer? Saucer means the surface area of a saucer and a cup would be different. Definitely in case of cup, what would it be? The surface area is less, but in case of a saucer, the surface area is more. So when you place hot tea or milk on a saucer, the surface area has increased, and as the surface area has increased, more particles are exposed to the surrounding, and thus more particles can absorb the energy from the surrounding and get converted from the liquid state to the gaseous state. So that's why the rate of evaporation happens faster, and we know evaporation leads to cooling. So the liquid which is on the saucer would be cooler faster than in comparison to cup. That's why we are able to sip hot tea or milk which is placed on a saucer rather than in a cup. Alright, now next let's move to the next question. What type of clothes should we wear in summer? What do you think? We had already discussed. Definitely it has to be cotton. Why cotton? There are two reasons why cotton can be used. One reason is that cotton is a very good absorber of moisture. First. Second is cotton has lot of air gaps, air pores on it. So these air pores, what do? Because cotton is a good absorber of moisture, it absorbs the sweat and exposes the sweat to the surrounding. And through the air pores, these sweat gets evaporated into the atmosphere. And we know that evaporation leads to cooling effect, and thus we feel cool. That's why during the summers we should wear only cotton clothes. Okay, so when you are writing this answer, you also need to write that why cotton clothes. The first factor would be because cotton absorbs moisture and cotton has air space which allows faster evaporation. Okay, then we also learned that there is concept of evaporation and boiling. Evaporation is a surface phenomena, whereas boiling is a bulk phenomena. For evaporation, there is no requirement of any specific temperature. It happens at any temperature. For boiling, there is specification of temperature. And evaporation depends on the rate, humidity level. More the humidity, less would be the evaporation rate. It also depends on the surface area. More the surface area, more would be the rate of evaporation. More the temperature, more would be the rate of evaporation.